Good morning. Welcome to my studio, at least an exhibit. I am just so extraordinarily grateful for ARC, for all the conveners, to get us together for these 3 days for what I believe is a historic moment. But as an artist speaking in this conference, if I were to stand here and speak stand-alone, as I say, without my works, it would be incomplete. And so I am so grateful for Baroness Philippa to have insisted on bringing these art pieces to be in front of you speaking already for the last 2 days. The one on the right, as we go from lament to glory, is my lament painting. I am a survivor. I was trapped in a subway, number 3, train, trying to get home, which was located 3 blocks away from where the towers, World Trade Towers stood. Trapped in the subway for 45 minutes, and the first tower collapsed on top of us. It is a miracle that I'm alive. And for many years after that, as I raised my children who became ground zero children, and as I thought about standing on the ashes of this destruction, called now ground zero, what that meant as an artist. I went into my studio every day trying to paint. For many days after, of course, that was impossible. But eventually I began to paint in layers and layers of pulverized minerals of Nihonga, an art form that harkens back really to 800, somewhere around there, where Japanese culture became more identified as a distinct culture at the end of the Silk Road. And pulverized pigments became part of this delicate layering process of creating deepness of beauty. And the depth of beauty that these pigments can create, there are over 200 layers of highly pulverized vermilion, Japanese vermilion on this painting. It's called water flames. And if you see me sitting there and often dashing about because people get too close to the paintings, that's because these paintings are done with this delicate Japanese hand-lifted paper, the largest hand-lifted paper in the world. Not only that, this paper, Kumohara paper, is no longer made in this quality. This is a paper from 20 years ago made by a master of paper maker in Western Japan. For generations, they have refined their craft so that this paper can be made in this way. And so you are looking at over 400-year-old tradition of paper making, which has actually gone extinct. So I am aware of the difficulty of preserving culture. And at the same time, I'm aware of facing ground zero every day and then daring to paint to create the future. And that vacillation is exemplified, as you saw in the video, of this art form of Japan called Kintsugi. That vacillation between looking at what is broken, something that has been destroyed, and yet you know that that is only a beginning of this art form called Kintsugi. As I said, Kintsugi is now ubiquitous. You have saw it in Ted Lasso. You saw it in Star Wars. You saw it in every place, in commercials and everywhere. But it's only because in our fractured time, in a time of desolation, we long for a better story. And this story, harkening back to 17th century, 16th century Japan, is a better story. Kintsugi masters, when they receive an important tea vessel, such as this one, they often spend time. They don't rush to fix. They spend generations of tea masters will hold on to the fragments without doing anything to them, to respect what has happened, to understand that some traumas takes generations before you begin to think about mending them. You see, we need to behold. We have this lost art of beholding. And in order to face my paintings, I often tell people, you will not see my paintings for about 20 minutes because you have to behold them. You have to let your mind settle from our anxieties and our fears and the troubles of our days, and to take a deep breath and to behold. In order to go from lament to glory, we must be able to behold. We have to start from beholding the broken. This is a better story because what Kintsugi Master was able to do after many generations, perhaps, of beholding, is to not just fix it back to the original state, which is often the case of Western industrialized thinking, right? If we drop an iPhone, we want a new one, or we want to at least get it fixed so it looks like the new one. No, Kintsugi Master instead highlights the fractures. And then, using Japan lacquer, this venerable art form of urushi, Japan lacquer, they pour gold, they sprinkle gold on top, therefore accentuating the fractures and making something new out of the brokenness. And the resulting bowl is even more valuable than the original bowl because it has been through two masters. Two masters and a family of tea master who cared for brokenness and trauma. Do you want to know how you might win culture war? It is to care for culture. It is to love your enemies, facing the devastation of ground zero. I have thought about that, struggled with it. And of course, that is an impossibility, right? Of course, that might be something that only an artist can say on stage. Because art is about creating impossibilities possible. To give you a portal of this new vista that may not have existed before I struggled with that question, how to love my enemies, standing on the ashes of ground zero. So this was painted in 2005, this in 2008, this golden piece called Charis. Charis in Greek means grace. Our journey from lament to glory is through grace. It is a grace journey. And this gold has actually painting of, has gold sheets on top, but it is the thinnest gold in the world, and therefore semi-transparent. I have 5 layers of gold. There's over 1,000 sheets of gold. Because I wanted to depict coming out of trauma, and again, thinking about this impossible question of how can I love my enemies? By creating a work that uses the materials that is universally a symbol of divinity, which is gold. Doesn't matter which culture you're from. And it captures the essence of what this conference is trying to say. That moving from lament to glory, we begin by beholding and lamenting. But that act, done in faith, will create a vista of glory, something new that is breaking in, something that couldn't have existed before the trauma. You know, we are all survivors. We are all survivors, especially after the pandemic. It's a miracle that any of us are here. And every day I count it as a privilege of this miraculous journey of an artist to not only have survived 9/11, but to be able to stand here today with these works, some 20-some years later, to be able to offer beauty back into a devastated world. And that work continues. My neighbor, Daniel Libeskind, who has been tasked to create a master plan for Ground Zero, was on the day of 9/11 at an opening of his building in Berlin, and that was his Holocaust Museum. He canceled the opening, flew to what is now Ground Zero, and he stood in the pit. And he said later on, when he was given this enormous responsibility of being the master designer of Ground Zero, he thought of the New Testament passages. He's a very devout Jew, observant Jew. But he said, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. I cannot create this building or any building without faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. What we do when we make, standing on the ashes of Ground Zero, is to create the future by using our imaginations first by faith. Without faith, we cannot create the future. Art happens to be also the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. And we are all artists in that sense in this room, considering what is the future. How do we create a better world for our children? And it is a way toward the future that imagination can begin to unfold this impossibility, a better story, standing on the Ground Zero ashes, and to say with Daniel, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. Thank you.